In the second stanza, I've already said how we get that revelation about who the photo is of. I haven't highlighted it, but I think it might be worth talking about. It says that he learnt the trade. The trade that he's referring to here, very interestingly, is cattle herding. So they're obviously from kind of a manual background, but this is when, if you want to call it a theme, I guess you could call it a theme, the theme of kind of like memory and history, or themes or change, kind of come through, because we see that he says that they're long fixed in sepia tints. Now sepia just means black and white, like a reference to the fact that the photo is in black and white. It highlights the fact that it's really old. And he uses words here again, faded patch, to show that this is something that is kind of like being left behind. And I guess it kind of orients us in terms of time and place, because we have a sense that this is set in the modern day and he's looking back at the past, and that's what the photograph represents. But we also have here a kind of idea that Heaney has about what should be done with that past, and he says that it must come down. He's talking about the photograph, but in doing so he's also talking about the past as well. So he's saying that it should come down, and we see in stanza 5 as well, the final line of the poem where he kind of resigns the photo to the attic, that is his overall message as well. I don't think that he's necessarily trying to forget that, but it's as though it doesn't belong in the modern day. I have highlighted this line here because I thought it was quite a kind of strong image, where he's talking about the patch of wallpaper or paint, I guess, where the photograph had been, and he describes it again using figurative language. So I'm going to make a note of that. As if a bandage had been ripped from skin. So that's actually quite a painful image about the past being kind of ripped away, compared with the other images in this poem. You do get something kind of similar in, I can't find it now. Oh yeah, stanza 5 again, where he talks about how times have changed and farmers shop like housewives. So there is like a sense of resentment there. I think that comes through in that kind of like painful image of the past being stripped away. But oddly, he's also a participant in that, so you might have some ideas about how you would interpret that yourself. In the third stanza, we are quite firmly kind of like placed in first person. Actually, I said at the beginning that the poem is written in first person, but you don't actually see evidence of that until the third stanza, because it's just a kind of description of these other characters. So what we have here is almost like a mini monologue. Now, third stanza is significant in terms of structure. I was saying to you earlier, it's continuous enjambment until the 6th line. And I think that kind of emulates the marketplace that he's describing, where he's kind of giving us an image of the men bartering and shouting and negotiating and things like that. So I think that kind of stanza structure reflects the kind of action that is taking place in the stanza. So if you have a look at, obviously, the first couple of lines, you can do some of your own analysis. The third line, we see that his father won at arguing. We see his father as quite a dominant figure. Actually, that's a theme of the whole collection as well. If you remember doing follower at GCSE, you might remember that his father is seen as quite a dominant figure. Arguing his own price. Okay, so you have like won and own. So those are quite strong words in terms of showing that he has kind of like, he possesses things and that he has the ability to kind of like be a winner and things like that. On a crowd of cattlemen, here I have highlighted just in terms of the consonants. Actually, I forgot to be looking for that. But there's lots of examples in this poem of alliteration, of consonants, and also of assonance as well. But I would have to have a look, like here, heckled and herded in the 4th stanza. So as you're going through, do look for those as well. It's my fault for not pointing those out sooner. So the consonants of the crowd of cattlemen. This is where my own kind of opinion comes through a little bit. We know that this is quite a gender-specific poem. It's about men and their behaviour and how they work. And he's emphasising that here because it's men, it's men's business. It's them kind of wheeling and dealing and working together and negotiating. And also the way in which he describes them, he does attempt to kind of masculinize them in this stanza, and then what he does in the 4th stanza is he emasculates them. So you have kind of a contrast there between these two stanzas, the masculinity of the men versus the emasculation of them in stanza 5. I think just simplistically that obviously shows the dominance of men in this profession, but also because Heaney wasn't really so much a part of that as well, perhaps it tells us something about how he feels about his sense of masculinity and whether or not he was able to really fully participate in that. I don't know, but these things, that kind of thing would be something for you to kind of think about or form your own opinion on. This line really does encapsulate it though. So the 5th and 6th line, the cattleman who handled rumps, groped teats, stood, paused, and then bought a round of drinks to clinch the bargain. That kind of couplet there is really focusing on their kind of like so-called stereotypical masculinity. I mean, obviously the physical imagery here is referring to cattle, but arguably there's something kind of like vaguely sexualized about it as well, especially because of the word groped. But it shows that they obviously are kind of what's the word? They're kind of aggressively sexualizing it more than anything. And then he talks about how all of this was done over kind of like drinks and bargaining and things like that. So it does have some kind of like atmospheric effects as well in terms of the ideas we form of how these men are behaving. Now, I've highlighted in the 5th stanza the alliteration of heckled and herded. That's again how his uncle and his father, uncle and nephew is referring to his great uncle and his father, how they're behaving in their work. But also this stanza shows again some quite vivid description of his great uncle. And the curtly smack hands and sell phrase here again shows that he's kind of someone who's a bit of a bargainer. And the reason I've highlighted here, the third line, is because if I remember correctly, again in the poem Digging, he talks about the use of his pen, how his pen is kind of his equivalent to his like manual work. And I just thought that that was like an interesting link here, because he talks about the cattle being penned in the frame, so it has kind of connotations of an actual pen as well. That might be worth looking into or thinking about. And his father did the same, so this is a job that was kind of inherited. It was a job that was kind of like passed down, a trade that was passed on, and good old Seamus Heaney couldn't keep up with it. So here he's actually addressing his father in the final stanza. He uses the personal pronoun you to speak to him, as he does again in some of his other poems. But I think the most interesting thing about this stanza is how he feminizes what these farmers who were kind of formerly men have become. And you see that here. You've got the verb shopped, and you've got the simile like housewives. And there he's really kind of satirizing the change that has taken place in terms of how these men behave. It's no longer a case of dealers kind of negotiating and arguing and making and forming deals. It's to do with like shopping. The simile of them being like housewives, obviously, I mean, that's clearly supposed to make them sound more effeminate. I find it a bit offensive, but and the last couplet, what Heaney does, oh, here, by the way, just in case you're wondering what he's talking about his father's walking stick that stands behind where I'm assuming like the bedroom door or whatever. So his father is all but gone, apart from these kind of small mementos. The final couple of lines, you have consonants closing this chapter of our chronicle. So again, what Heaney's doing is he's relegating this to history, it's kind of memory. And he finishes the poem with, I take your uncle's portrait to the attic. So the attic, I guess you guys don't really have those in Hong Kong, because why would you? So he's talking about leaving that photo, that picture, in a room at the top of the house, just to kind of wither away into memory as well. So it's not going to be anywhere of kind of significance. He's kind of leaving the past behind here in this poem. I'm not going to lie, there's probably a lot more that you could get out of it than that. But when I read it, those were just kind of some of the things that stood out to me.